Welcome to our guest docket. Today I'm going to be interviewing my co-host Mike Weber, local attorney in Cincinnati who specializes in representing injured workers in the state of Ohio. Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and what caused you or why'd you get into representing injured workers?
Well, my dad, Don Weber, who is 82 years old and still practices full-time, started practicing law back in 1961. So I was born in 64, so it was part of the household for my whole life, and I don't think I really ever had much of a choice other than to be an attorney.
Now, where'd you go to law school? Where'd you go to college?
Well, I went to undergrad college at Case Western Reserve University. I got out of there in 1986. Then I went to George Washington University up in Washington, D.C., left there in 1989. Have been here. I started with the Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office to get a couple years of trials, and then I've been on my own since the early 90s.
And if I'm not mistaken, you were a college football player, is that correct?
Yeah, we had 4 real good years playing college football. I had a 3-day NFL career, but that obviously didn't work out all that great, so I'm back being an attorney.
3 more days than most people, right?
Yeah.
Mike, what is workers' compensation?
Workers' compensation is insurance that is provided normally through the state of Ohio to an employer, and it covers injured workers who have suffered injuries on the job.
Are there different types of workers' compensation claims with regard to employers?
You know, the majority, I would say 80% of the employers get their insurance through the state of Ohio, the BWC, and they're called state-funded employers. The majority of the remainder are what's called self-insured employers. Those are the bigger employers that provide the insurance themselves. There's also a thing called PE employers, which are public employees like the counties and the cities, and there's also non-compliant employers, which are employers that don't have workers' comp, but regardless, they all fall and are governed by the same statutes and codes.
What type of injuries are covered under Ohio workers' compensation law?
You know, any type of injury that occurs on the job. The legal term is within the course and scope of the employment. If you think about it, there are an area where you're not in the course and scope, there's a gray area, and there's a black area where you clearly are on the job. If you're on the job and, you know, the safe falls off the shelf and lands on your foot, most likely there's no question about coverage there. Whereas if you're in your driveway and getting into your car and heading into the office and slip and fall in your own driveway, you know, you don't have workers' comp coverage there. You do get into some gray areas. A good example is when you're parking your car in the employer's parking lot. You know, the questions that we see a lot of times are, is there coverage for that situation? So the question is, are you within the course and scope of the employment? And if you are, you have workers' comp.
What are occupational diseases?
Occupational diseases there's a variety of them, but basically, you know, for exposure to chemicals is a good example of an occupational disease. They have scheduled and they have non-scheduled conditions. Anything that's really not, I guess, best described as trauma-related can fall under the occupational disease.
What does a person do if they are hurt in a job?
You know, the most important thing is to document the injury. If you get hurt on the job, you want to promptly report it to your employer. And you also want to put something in writing. Don't just tell somebody, you ask them for an incident report, you fill out that incident report, because that'll protect you as you go down the road. The next thing you want to do is you want to see a workers' compensation doctor promptly. And when you talk to that doctor, you have to explain to him that it is a work-related injury. And because the documentation comes back later on, it's very, very important that shows how you hurt yourself. The other thing that's important when you meet with a doctor is that you tell them every body part that has been hurt. So if you hurt your neck and your shoulder and your mid-back, you want to be sure that you describe that to your doctor. The next thing is you want to keep good records, you want to document everything, and as the injured worker, even though sometimes the hospital or your doctor will fill out and file an application for you, it's your responsibility to be sure that you have a claim with the Ohio BWC. So you need to check and do whatever is necessary to get a claim file and then to get a claim number. once you get a claim file and a claim number, the processing of that claim starts, and you will ultimately get a response, as to what's been approved, what may not be approved from the BWC.
Now, are there exceptions to workers' compensation coverage? I mean, are all claims covered? I mean, like independent contractors, if I'm playing softball for the team, my employer's softball team, are things like that covered?
I've been doing this now for 25 years, and there are so many gray areas, and I'm sure you can agree with me on that, the question is first is, are you an employee? Because as you said, if you're an independent contractor, you're your own little business and you're in there to perform a service for another business, and that's not a workers' comp situation where you're going to have any coverage. You can have recreational activities where you may or may not have coverage. The employer can have you sign waivers that say that, hey, we're not going to give you workers' comp coverage if you get hurt at the employee picnic. Again, it gets back to, are you an employee? And, was this within the course and scope of your employment?
What if the injury that occurred was the injured worker's fault?
That's a good question, because a lot of people ask that, fault plays no role. And that goes both directions. If the injured worker trips over his own 2 feet while he's in the course and scope of employment, falls down the steps, knocks over the ladder and it lands on his head, there is still coverage. That being said, if the employer is negligent and negligently leaves a broom in the middle of the floor and next to a shovel that's next to a rake, and he trips over all 3 and hurts himself, then you can't go after the employer for negligence, but you do get full coverage under the workers' comp. So really, in either direction, fault or negligence on either party's part really plays no role.
What if the employer files bankruptcy?
If an employer goes out of business, the state of Ohio protects you. Okay, so you would just become covered through the state. The employer would play no role.
What happens after the injury?
After the injury, you're going to file with Workman's Comp, you're going to get a claim number, and then the Bureau will process that claim. They'll talk to the employer, they'll get all of your medical records, they'll ask you to get medical records, incident reports, whatever. The Bureau will review it, and they'll make a decision whether or not that claim is going to be approved. Now, the most important thing is, just because the Bureau says that the claim is not going to be approved, that you have the right to appeal, because they may not have all the information, they may not understand, they may not have talked to you in detail about what happened. So you will get either an approval or a denial from the BWC. If you get an approval, yes, that's good. But if you get anything denied, you want to be really careful, because you have appeal rights, and most likely you'll want to appeal anything that's denied.
What if your claim is denied by Workers' Comp or the Industrial Commission of Ohio? Do you have any recourse at that point?
Well, once the BWC makes a decision and denies something, the case is referred to the Industrial Commission, which is where they actually have hearings. Once you get in front of the administrative law judges, they're the people that are making the first level of important decisions after the BWC. They will either approve or deny, or some combination thereof, your claim. And ultimately, though, you have the right to appeal what's called a right to participate, which is the allowance of a claim or conditions in a claim. You can appeal that out of the Industrial Commission, actually appeal it as far as going to court in the Court of Common Pleas in the state of Ohio.
How do I find a doctor? I'm an injured worker, I don't feel good, I hurt. How do I find a doctor to treat me for my industrial injuries?
The most important thing is you have to find a doctor that takes workers' compensation, and you have to find a doctor that wants to take workers' compensation, because workers' comp requires effort on the part of the doctors. They have to support somebody who gets hurt on the job. And if they don't want to step up and do what's necessary to help you with your workers' comp, you really should be looking for other doctors. If you have a workers' comp case, you need them to write and document why treatment is necessary, why you need to amend the claim to go from, say, a lumbar sprain to a herniated disc that's showing up on the MRI. So that doctor has to be able to really to help out. It has to be supportive. And they also have to be workers' comp certified.
Please stay tuned for our fourth docket, frequently asked questions about workers' compensation.